Have you ever said things like, I'm not good enough, I don't belong here, I'm not sure I have what it takes? How does this impact your self confidence? And how does this impact how you show up, how you sound, and how you speak? Has imposter syndrome stopped you from applying for roles in your career? If so, type in a +1. Studies show that 70% of the population have experienced imposter syndrome at one point in their careers. These thoughts tend to come to a peak when you're facing a new challenge, starting a new job, or encountering new tasks after a promotion. If you're wondering how to show up at work with greater confidence, certainty, and courage, then today's show on how to overcome imposter syndrome is for you. Hello and welcome to the Dare to Differentiate show. The purpose of the show is to help you own your voice, value, and visibility with confidence. Whether you're tuning in live or watching the replay, I am so delighted that you're here. Comment to let us know where are you tuning in from. And if you're new here, type in new. I want to welcome you. If you've been a big supporter of mine, type in big fan, and I want to welcome you back as well. Awesome. Well, hello and welcome. I'm your host, Diana YK Chan, LinkedIn top voice and founder of My Markability, where I help you stand out, get hired, and earn more. If we're not connected yet, make sure to follow me on LinkedIn, YouTube, or my Instagram. All right, let me just check in the comments to say hello. All right, hello, Jennifer, Stephen, and Tara. Welcome. Hi, Lily. Great to see familiar faces here. Amazing, amazing. Okay, so today's show is an exciting one as I have best-selling author Melody Welding on the show today. I have her book with me, Trust Yourself. So what we're going to cover today, or an agenda, is we're going to talk about Melody's career story, and then we're going to dive into practical tips and advice on overcoming imposter syndrome. In particular, we're going to take the angle of imposter syndrome at work, job search, and interviews. We're going to talk about what is imposter syndrome, why does imposter syndrome occur, how imposter syndrome impacts career advancement and job search, how to overcome imposter syndrome, how to stop self-doubting and sabotaging your own success, how to recognize and own your value with confidence. In other words, how not to downplay your accomplishments, how to go after opportunities even if you're not fully qualified, how to speak up at work even if you're new to the job, and lastly, how to regain confidence from criticism. So if you're excited for today's show, type in a +1 here. This is a very juicy topic. So just a reminder, if you can't watch the entire show, that's totally okay. Replay will be available. You can come on over to my YouTube channel at Diana YK Chan, where we'll also be adding timestamps later on for easy viewing. Now, I want to really encourage you to click like and comment anytime, engage with us, share your thoughts, key learnings, and questions, engage with one another as well. This is also a great networking opportunity for you. I also want to raise the vibrational energy up as well. Show your appreciation to our speaker. Share your kind words and type in #GoMelody. She's already backstage. And also special shout out to my assistant, Jen Dale Carlo, Catalonia and Philippines, who's also helping me with engaging with you all in the chat there. Okay, so let me introduce you to Melody. I met her for the first time in real life last month in New York at the LinkedIn Learning Instructor Reunion event. And I really connected with Melody. She is so authentic, genuine, kind, helpful. And interestingly, I received a copy of her book from a client of mine earlier this year. And I really like this book. And I also love the branding of this book because it really ties into my branding as well, the blue and the gold, the bronze here. So I actually have this book with me all the time, like right behind me here. And I actually had this book when I went for my photo shoot in June. I actually held up Melody's book. So that's a little backstory. So I was so excited that I got a chance to meet her in New York and invite her to my show today. So Melody Welding is the best-selling author of Trust Yourself, Stop Overthinking and Channel Your Emotions for Success at Work. Named one of Business Insider's most innovative coaches for her groundbreaking work on sensitive strivers. Her clients include CEOs, CEOs, C-level executives, and managers at top Fortune 500 companies such as Google, Amazon, JP Morgan, and many more. Melody has been featured in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and is a contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Psychology Today, and Forbes. Melody is a licensed social worker with a master's from Columbia University and a professor of human behavior at Hunter College in New York City. All right, are you excited? Let's welcome Melody to the show. Hi, Melody.
Hi, I am thrilled to be here today. And hi, everyone in the chat. I am loving this energy so far.
It's a great energy, right? Like, look at all the hashtags, Melody. Go, Melody here. There's so much support here. I'm loving this already. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have an audience here on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and our Facebook as well. So great to see many of you here today. So, I'm so glad we got to meet. Like, I was telling people about your book here, and so excited I manifest to have you on my show today. So, why don't we start off with you telling us a little bit about your story, a little bit of the story of how you came about writing the book here. What inspired you to write the book?
Yes. So it's twofold. So I have been coaching now for over 10 years. And in my work with my clients, over and over again, I kept seeing some very consistent patterns of things that people were facing as challenges or things that they were struggling with. Things like overthinking, people pleasing, and perfectionism, and particularly seeing how those would come up in their career and their work. So that was one piece. But what I didn't realize is that I was also writing the book that I desperately needed at an earlier point in my journey. And I was someone who also struggled with all of those things pretty much my entire life, but they definitely showed up more in my career. And imposter syndrome, our topic today, is one of those. But all of those different factors led me to writing the book. Really, the inspiration being I want to give people a manual, something very practical, actionable that they can use to overcome these challenges. But I also want to write the book that I know I needed when I was in this situation.
That's so wonderful to hear that. And so tell us a little bit more of your niche now as an executive, a coach. Who are your ideal clients?
Yes. So I specifically work with people that I call sensitive strivers. You mentioned that term early on when you were sharing my bio. And so a sensitive striver is someone who is both high achieving, they are driven, they set high goals for themselves, they may put a lot of pressure on themselves to succeed, and they are also highly sensitive. So these are people, it's about 20 to 30% of the population that actually is biologically wired, has different brain makeup that leads them to having a more active nervous system. So people who are highly sensitive, yes, they are empathetic, they are kind, but fundamentally, biologically, they are more responsive to their environment. So they're picking up on more details, more nuances, they're processing information more deeply, they're more aware of other people's behavior, and they tend to be more self-reflective. So all of those can be tremendous strengths, and that's part of my mission and why I do this work, is to make sure we have these type of people in leadership and the best, most powerful roles. But if you don't have the right tools or these qualities aren't channeled effectively, they can have some downsides.
Yeah. I'm going to ask the audience here if you can relate to being a sensitive striver, type in a +1. When I was reading your book, I felt like being a sensitive striver is also just really the feeling. We feel more, right? There's certain things that we just feel or see, the emotion side there. So I want to move on and ask you, tell us a little bit about your latest course. What's it about? I know it's related to this topic as well.
Yeah, so I actually just had a course come out a few days ago. This is really hot off the presses, and it is called Leading as a Highly Sensitive Person. So I was thrilled when LinkedIn said, "Hey, we want to do a course on this because this is a gap. Yet this is something that so many people can relate to." And I think it's wonderful because, we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion in our workplaces. And something that I don't think we have talked about enough as of yet is neurodiversity. The fact that there are natural differences in the way people think and process information, high sensitivity being one of them. So I think it's fantastic that we're getting more visibility for the fact that not everyone approaches work and approaches how they process information and interact with other people in the same way. So this course is really about how do you become confident in the value and what you can contribute as a highly sensitive leader while also mitigating some of those downsides and difficulties that can come with the trait.
Amazing. That's so great to hear. So tell us a little bit more about what other courses that you have on LinkedIn Learning.
Yes. My most popular course, and one I think will relate to people who are here, is called Overcome Overthinking. Overthinking is a big part of what happens when we have imposter syndrome. We overthink situations, we get into analysis paralysis, we ruminate, we get caught in comparison. And so that course, Overcome Overthinking, is really to give you tools to get out of your own way, get past those unhelpful thoughts, make decisions more quickly, and find more clarity. So that's one of my most popular ones. I also have courses on how to say no at work and set boundaries, managing burnout, taking work less personally, which I think we'll touch on today. How do you separate your self-worth from your productivity? So there's something for everyone.
That's amazing to hear. So before we dive into the topic, I want to do a little bit of storytelling. If we can maybe share a story or time when you faced imposter syndrome and how you dealt with it. And I want to share a bit of mine as well, too, because I know we all face it, like especially the stats, like 70% of people face it in their lifetime or in their careers. So maybe we'll kick off a story. And if anyone want to share a bit of your own story of imposter syndrome, so we can all relate to one another here.
Every day I face imposter syndrome. And, I think that's important to share because, the term overcome imposter syndrome, I think sometimes can be a little misleading because it's not something that you necessarily overcome as much as you learn to be more resilient too. So there are still moments where I doubt myself, where I question my abilities, and it's happening right now. I am working on a second book. It's a topic that is related to what I've talked about in trust yourself, assertiveness, and building confidence in the workplace and taking control of your career. It's related, but it's a bit outside of my core zone of expertise, like trust yourself was. And so I am constantly up against, can I do this? Am I really the expert on this? Who am I to be talking about this when there have already been books written in a number of these different categories already? And so much of that comes back to, and the whole name of your show is Dare to Differentiate. And it really comes back to what's the unique value I have to offer here? How can I carve out my unique niche? And for me, that has been remembering that given my background as a social worker, human behavior professor, I can uniquely bring that perspective, the neuroscience, the psychology of these aspects to that work, as well as my work with my clients informing that. So I think that's important to remember that, yes, there may be people out there that are doing similar things to you, but someone needs what you uniquely have to hear.
Oh, such a powerful message. Someone needs what you uniquely have to offer here, right? Knowing your value. That is so, so key. I'll share with you a little my story on around imposter syndrome. So I recently shared on my LinkedIn that my dream has always become a global speaker. And I knew this like over 10 years ago when I was going through university that I wanted to do this. But I always had this doubt that I would tell myself, oh, um, I don't have enough experience yet, or I don't know enough about it yet, or I haven't faced enough of the situations to be able to become a global speaker. And however, I still try to keep my dream alive by doing speaking. And I remember this year, I really declared, okay, I'm ready to take it to the next level, to go more global. And I put it on my vision board. And I went to create my web page to update my speaking page. But for months, I did not share it. I finished it. I did not share it. Like in the summer, I just did not share it. And it wasn't even until coming to the event in September, meeting all of you in September, it really shifted my perspective. I was actually in awe and seeing so many amazing instructors, speakers, and I was inspired. There was a bit of thought imposter syndrome, like, who am I to be here? I only have one course, but then I remind myself I deserve to be here and I have that voice, an important message to share. And it was my first time at the event that I actually declared and shared it with other fellow instructors that I am ready and committed to really step up my game to do global speaking.
Yeah.
And there was this really powerful shift when I declare that with other fellow people that I admire. And coming back on my plane, I remember my friend came with me on the plane I was telling her about this dream, and she was already reminding me that you are already doing it. You're already doing it. You have gained this experience. And really she gave me that confidence to share it with the world, like to really publish it, like to really declare that. And as a result, like good things have happened. Like by declaring it, I've now actually manifested, attracted more companies or people referring me for speaking opportunities. But I felt like it took me the last 10 years to really come to be like, okay, I'm ready to play a bigger game. And part of it, I feel, is also coming from an Asian culture where I was told to like downplay, dismiss, deflect on our accomplishments, to own our value. And so it really took me a while as well to get to the place where I'm at there. So I thought I would share that story. It does happen to all of us out there.
It's so important. There's so many great takeaways and lessons in there that we'll talk more about as we get into the questions. But just to point out a few, changing your self-talk, right? You change the narrative that you were telling yourself, and then your actions were able to follow suit.
Yeah.
You started to internalize your accomplishments. We'll talk a lot about that, I know.
Yeah.
And these effects of culture, the people we surround ourselves with, the environments that we're in, can really shape how we relate to ourselves. So making sure that we're intentional and conscious about putting ourselves in the right and best situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Changing the narrative, the self-talk there. All right, so we have a great audience right now here. I see on LinkedIn, 70 plus of you here on my LinkedIn here. So welcome. We're going to move into part 2 of the agenda, which is practical tips and advice on overcoming imposter syndrome. So welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're here, type a note +1 to say hello to us here. So Melody, dive into our topic here. Let's kick off. What is imposter syndrome?
Yes. Simply put, imposter syndrome is that feeling of being a fake or a fraud despite your accomplishments. And that's very important here. That people with imposter syndrome, there is a gap between how they perceive themselves and what is reality. So, a fundamental hallmark of imposter syndrome is an inability to internalize your success. So, you may have lots of degrees, positive performance reviews. People say you do a great job at work, yet you don't fully believe that. You feel like at any moment you're going to be exposed as you don't know what you're doing, or people will say you just got lucky to be here. So it's that feeling of intellectual fraudulence.
And why does it occur?
Yes. There are so many reasons that it can occur. So let's talk about nature first. So some of us are more predisposed to being susceptible to imposter syndrome. So as I was talking about before, people who are highly sensitive, those folks who are sensitive strivers, we are wired to be more aware of other people's emotions and behaviors. So we're almost scanning the environment at all times. We're vigilant for, what do people think about me? How am I stacking up against how do I stack up against somebody else's performance? So
Yeah.
we're by default more vigilant. So you have the nurture, or I'm sorry, you have the nature side, then you have more of the nurture side. And this is a big component here because we have the environment. Not only we have our upbringing, our conditioning. Diana, you mentioned culture, that plays a big part of it. Gender can also play a big role, especially young women. We're told play by the rules, don't show up other people, right? Don't be too big-headed about your accomplishments. It may also come from family messages. If you were the smart one or the good one, you may feel pressure to live up into that label, even into your adulthood and in the workplace. And workplace environments play a huge role. If your workplace is very competitive, cutthroat, you may feel like, I'm never good enough, I don't measure up. If you're the only person who looks like you or thinks like you, then it's natural to feel like you're an outsider. And if there's a lack of role models, so you don't see anyone who can normalize, hey, it's okay if, you're having trouble your first 6 months on the job. I struggle too, and don't worry, you'll get there. To not have someone normalizing that can be very isolating, as can being in an environment where you are just getting constant criticism. You can feel like, wow, nothing is ever good enough. I can't do anything right.
Yeah, that's a huge one. I've been hearing a lot because the work I do a lot of times when people are looking to make a career transition, and if they're looking to make a change, there is about that self-doubt, can I do it? But there's also this piece of impact from work where if they received a lot of criticism from colleagues or a boss and they're doubting themselves whether they can really make a pivot or go to like a next level, a role. I know of a personal story, like when I worked in management consulting, this was like 10 years ago after my MBA. And it was really competitive environment. I remember a lot of times when we I was meeting someone new, oftentimes people would be asking me like, "Are you up for a promotion yet?" Or what are your billable hours like? Or what's your performance like? And I've been there like less than a year or like a couple months.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm just still figuring out how to be a consultant here.
Yeah.
And I doubted myself so many times, like, do I have what it takes to be a consultant while working these crazy hours?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like a lot of people can relate to here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how does imposter syndrome impact a career advancement in
Mhm.
job search?
Yeah, there's 5 primary ways that imposter syndrome can show up. So the first is perfectionism. That is this all or nothing thinking that you have to be perfect or you're a failure. So that can be putting pressure on yourself to be the expert before you speak up in a meeting, before you apply to a role, right? Expecting that you should do something right on the first try. And if you don't, then what are you doing? You're not cut out for your job. And of course, we think of perfectionism as refining, polishing something. So you may just, fritter away time changing periods and words in your resume instead of actually applying for the role. So that's one, perfectionism. We also have on the flip side procrastination. So this is what's the irony of imposter syndrome, that it can also look like holding yourself back. So waiting to the last minute to finish a project or put your hat in the ring for something, because you can then attribute any lack of performance to your lack of preparation. You may diminish yourself. You may reject praise. You may lie low, avoid new opportunities or challenges because you don't want to be exposed as not knowing what you're doing or unable to handle it. So, perfectionism, procrastination, comparison. How does that compare and despair? See someone on LinkedIn, they're getting raises and promotions and they're doing wonderful things, and you feel like you are unworthy of your success. You fear failure and you're very sensitive to rejection. You take any rejection as a sign that you are unworthy. You obsess over your weaknesses. You hone in on the areas that are your faults and over amplify them instead of indexing on what are your strengths. Then there's overcompensation. This is the one I see a lot, especially among high achievers. And they say, "Oh, well, I'm just a hard worker." But overcompensation can look like pursuing more degrees, more training, certifications because you don't think you're knowledgeable enough or good enough as you are. You may take on more work because you feel like, well, if I just do more, that will be able to prove to myself and other people that I'm worthy. And a big one is something called over functioning, where you try to fix and rescue other people. You take responsibility away from them, you put it on yourself because you want to be useful and valuable to them. And then last is people pleasing. So most people are aware of this. This can show up as trouble saying no to opportunities, overextending yourself. Holding back your opinions and ideas is also people pleasing. You want to be likable so that you avoid being exposed. You obsess over external validation. If your boss says, "Hey, you did good on that presentation," you have a great day. But if you don't get that external validation, you feel really crummy. So those are the 5 ways it can show up. And as you can see, it can manifest in different forms depending if you're job searching, if you're interviewing, if you're
Yeah.
new in your role.
Yeah, yeah. I want to ask the audience, like, I want to review these 5 here. Which one does it resonate with you? Like, when you think about imposter syndrome, how it impacts your career advancement or job search. Number 1 is the perfectionism. Number 2 is the procrastination. Number 3 is the comparison. Number 4 is the overcompensation or overfunctioning. And then lastly is people pleasing. Which one do you resonate with here? And Melody, Laura has a question. How, I guess to clarify, how does perfectionism comparison differentiate to procrastination?
To procrastination.
How does
Okay,
it?
hold on.
Yeah.
Let me just read that question again. How does perfectionism, comparison, and procrastination, how are they different? So perfectionism can be very self-focused. It can be very, I have to be perfect or I'm a failure. Whereas comparison is how do you stack up against other people? And procrastination is avoiding situations, waiting till the last minute. So they're all very interrelated. They're slightly different. Hopefully that clarifies.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's look at some comments. I do all of this. Kristen said, I'm guilty of all of this. Carol shared all of them. Perfection is me. Paul shared all of the above. Okay. So it sounds like a lot of people can really relate to what we're talking about right now. All okay. Let me just share Stephen's comment. My past battles with imposter syndrome are linked to my upbringing, for instance, being expected to get it right the first time. The more this happened, the more I questioned my own decision making and hence overthinking. Oh, wow. That's a big one. Yes, I could totally relate to that. Getting that right the first time. If you're not right, then you're overthinking what's wrong with me.
Mhm.
Okay. Yes. All right. Wow. So comparison. Yeah, I'm just want to acknowledge some of the comments that we're seeing here. Melanie, can imposter syndrome be a positive thing as well?
You know, I feel torn on this because go experiencing imposter syndrome, it's never fun, right? It's a difficult thing to go through, and it's problematic when your self-conception of yourself doesn't match reality. So it can be problematic in that way. And I should clarify that imposter syndrome in and of itself is not a mental health condition, but it can, as probably many of you are understanding as I'm talking, it can lead to anxiety, depression, even physical issues, burnout. Um, and so it can be a positive in that it does signal you are someone who is actually capable. So there's something that's the opposite of imposter syndrome. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that is when someone who is incompetent, who is not knowledgeable, thinks they're very knowledgeable, but they're not. They don't have expertise and competence. I'm sure we can all think of people who fall into that category as well. So the good news about imposter syndrome is that it does mean you are a high achiever. You are someone who pushes yourself.
Mm.
And the irony of imposter syndrome many times is that it can become more acute as you advance in your career because the metrics of success are less clear cut. Things are more ambiguous. And so I offer that because, again, it's not necessarily that it completely goes away and you're the most confident person in the world, because confidence is being able to recognize your strengths as well as your weaknesses, but have more of a level headed approach to that.
Mhm.
Whereas imposter syndrome is really going down these negative spirals, falling into these self sabotaging, self defeating behaviors.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point there. And I think as long as we're self-aware and we can think of ways to combat that, right? So let's move into that next question here is how to overcome imposter syndrome, how to deal with it.
Yes. Yes. Well, we were talking about your story earlier, and I mentioned that something you did very well was reframing those unhelpful thoughts and beliefs. It sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that there was this narrative that you were not qualified to be a international speaker, that it wasn't your time, or maybe you needed more training or more practice under your belt. And imposter syndrome, what really fuels a lot of those imposter syndrome behaviors, those 5 behaviors I mentioned earlier, are automatic, unhelpful thoughts and beliefs. Things like, I'm not good enough. Everyone is going to find out I'm I'm making all of this up. A big one for me is I was a one-hit wonder. I got lucky that one time, that one presentation went well, but that was an exception, and I won't be able to replicate that in the future. So I want to encourage everyone to identify what is your most common imposter syndrome story. What's the automatic story you default to when something good happens to you? How and why do you explain it away? What's the narrative you tell yourself?
Mm,
So, first, I'll stop there for right now, but first is to identify
yeah.
that automatic negative script.
Yeah. Identifying that negative script, like what's popping up immediately before
Yes.
we move on, right? I'm gonna share a quick story because this maybe help with what you're teaching here. 2 years ago, I ran my first ever live stream show. And not only did I did it just with one guest, but I did it with 20 guests over 2 days as my give back event called the Career Relaunch Summit. And I had only 3 weeks to plan. I invited 20 career experts and coaches to my show. All said yes within a few days. I was so pumped and excited. But leading up to it, like leading up to days before, for some reason, my hands were shaking. And I'm like, who am I to do this? So many impressive guests coming on the show. And my hands were shaking. I remember I had to call a dear friend of mine. I'm like, why am I feeling this way? And it's because things were happening, were in motion. And I'm like, wow, we have some amazing people here. And the way I had to overcome it was really that reframing my why, making my why greater than my fears. Meaning that my why was I want to give back. I want to make a difference. This is why I'm doing it. This is why I took massive action in 3 weeks. And really I reminded myself that I'm going to have a good time because it was new show,
Yeah.
uh, new format of even just doing a summit like in 2 days, like just talking for 12 hours there. And then just having some amazing guests to come chat with me for half an hour each time. So anything could have gone wrong, like with tech, the tech could have gone wrong. So there were a lot of that, me going like, wow, who am I to do this? I don't have this, never run a show before, but I had to have a friend be like, okay, you got this. Like people want to be there for you. They're cheering you on. Thousands of people signed up. You're going to make a big difference. So I had to have these affirmations remind myself like leading up to that big day.
I love that. It's such a great story. And you are someone I really admire with this because you have such a strong inner coach. And I get that from just all of your content that I see you put out there. You have such a great way of affirming yourself and others. And I think that's very instructive for everyone to realize that within us, yes, we may have this strong inner critic that is dominant right now. We have that voice of imposter syndrome, but with practice and with effort, you can cultivate that inner coach. And if it's helpful, think of the inner coaches you have, or rather, the real life coaches you have in your life, whether it's a great mentor, a supportive partner, or parent, or friend, what have you. What would that person say to you in that moment? And adopt that as your own belief.
Yeah. 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 That's good. Okay. So let's continue on. So you said first is to recognize it.
Yes.
What's the narrative story? What's the second part here?
Yes. And then we have to reframe it. So, as I was saying, calling on that inner coach, what would they be saying to you? And I want to offer a few reframing questions that folks can put in their toolbox, can keep on a post-it note on their desk. How would my best friend or my personal hero respond to this situation? And that's important because, as you were saying before, you went back to your why. And I would say go back to your values, right?
Mm,
How can you respond in a way that's most aligned with your values and what's most important to you? That can really help almost immediately put any situation into perspective. So that's the first question. How would my best friend or my hero respond to this situation? If I knew everything was going to work out just fine, how would my view change? What can I learn from this? And or How can I grow from this? When have I handled situations like this before? And what was helpful to me then? What thought gets me closer to my goals? What thought gets me closer to my goals?
Mhm.
So you don't necessarily have to believe any of these thoughts yet, but the point here is to get yourself in the practice of thinking differently, because right now it's almost as if your brain is a record player and a situation comes up. Maybe it's being asked to do a new project at work or getting a call back for a big interview, and our brain defaults to these negative tracks. It's like a record player that has a really deep groove, and it just keeps going to that one track that says, you're not good enough, you're going to blow this, it's going to be horrible, right? So we have to consciously train ourselves to almost pick up the needle on that record player and practice putting it on a different track. So it does take effort at first.
I love that. I love that. Putting yourself on a different track, shifting that perspective there. I really like that particular question of asking yourself a time when you did something like this to give you the confidence, and also like what thoughts get me closer to these goals, because
Yeah,
that will shift you. Okay, well, what am I trying to achieve here? Why is this important to me to step into your own greatness?
absolutely. Well said.
Awesome. Is there a follow up in terms of steps to this?
Well, I think I would love to challenge everyone here if you're willing to play along with us, and maybe Diana, if you
Yeah.
have an example. Uh, was there a situation that happened to you recently, and could you reframe that situation? So, what we're talking about here is something called explanatory style. So, in psychology, that basically means when you are faced with a difficult situation, what is the story you tell yourself? So there are people that have a pessimistic explanatory style, and with imposter syndrome, that happens more often. So when something good happens to us, we attribute it to external factors. It was luck, it was timing, someone helped me, I was a one hit wonder. We see our achievements as a one off, not indicative of our skill or our intelligence, and we see it as temporary and fleeting. Like, oh, that it's not going to last long. People
Yeah.
who have an optimistic explanatory style see good things as a result of their own efforts. So their capabilities, their smarts, their efforts, they see the good things as more permanent, more stable. And this is really the difference between saying something like, I'm really great at product marketing versus, well, that launch went well because all of these factors aligned. So is there a situation? I know I'm putting you on the spot, Diana, but
Yeah.
is there a situation that comes up for you where maybe you define something more with that pessimistic lens that you could see through more of an optimistic lens?
Um, well, I'm thinking, for example, like recently, getting an inquiry for a speaking gig with a Fortune 500 company.
Mhm.
And I knew that was different from my usual type of speaking gigs because it was for a much bigger company, and it was for multiple speaking engagements. So part of me there, excitement, but there was also part of me feeling, oh, am I ready yet for this? Or how am I going to best position myself there? And I felt that I go over and beyond by putting together my proposal. Instead of just a proposal with like a Word document, I made it, really nice. I got my assistant to help me like make a really nice premium looking proposal. I don't know if that's overcompensating, but I also know that was like my standard of excellence. I want to present myself in the best light,
Mhm.
to elevate my game, to position myself at the readiness for this. So yeah, because so there it took me like a week to put all that together, because I was thinking how to best put myself in a way that would land that speaking gig.
Love it. Love it. And there's a really important lesson in there that also gets to overcoming imposter syndrome, which is that you can't wait to feel confident to take action. You have to act before you feel 100% ready. And confidence is really a byproduct of taking action. when we have imposter syndrome, we convince ourselves that I need to be 110% qualified before I apply for something, before I take on a stretch project at work. But the way we acquire competence is by having the courage to put ourselves in difficult situations. We see our resilience and our resourcefulness, and we trust ourselves, and that's how confidence is built. So I offer that for everyone because there's probably a situation that we're all facing
Yeah.
where we keep putting it off to say, "Oh, but once I do XYZ, once I take this training, once I do this, then I'll be ready."
Yeah. 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 And I've seen this a lot too. Like when I think about clients I work with, they're like, well, I got to wait till I get my certificate or wait till I get my degree,
Yeah.
wait till I take all these courses before I can make the switch or
Mhm.
before I can start applying for a job.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Awesome. Okay. Let me see here. I just want to see what are some of the comments. There are a lot of comments coming in. Um, Stuart wrote that you would just explain my explanatory style without me realizing it's a pessimistic style.
Mhm.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. And even
Okay.
having that awareness, I think, allows you to have that moment where you could say, "Oh, I'm falling into this habit again. Let me make a conscious decision to do something differently."
Yeah. And Kristen shared my career. I've always said say my positions have just come to me because I was lucky to be in the right place
Yeah.
and they needed a warm body. Never knew that they want to do what they want to do with my career. Know I have skills, but not sure where I'm meant to be, and always questioning.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. Yes, this all in fact impacts confidence here. So let's move on to the next piece. Is there any more before we move into the next question?
I think we're good.
Good. Okay. Perfect. So, how to stop self doubting and sabotaging your own success? So,
Yeah.
this goes back to that pessimistic, negative self talk. How is that really hindering us? But also, how do we stop doing that there?
Yeah. So we've already talked about some strategies in that realm, but I want to talk about some areas we haven't touched on so much yet. And that is being aware and selective of your environment and the people you surround yourself with. Because, Diana, you had a great story earlier about being at the LinkedIn instructors meeting and having that encouragement and inspiration really lifted you up and allowed you to say, "Oh, wait, maybe I can do this, and I should be putting myself out there. Why not? What's the worst that can happen?" And specifically for those folks out there who relate to being highly sensitive, we have something called differential susceptibility, which is a fancy way of saying that we are more affected by our surroundings than the other 80% of the population. And so, because of that, we have to be much more mindful to create conditions and put ourselves in situations where we can succeed. And so that might really be making big overhauling changes if you find yourself in a very toxic work environment where you're constantly being dragged down, or the competition you were talking about, the consulting environment can be very cutthroat, that is exacerbating your own
Yeah.
imposter syndrome. Or it can really be as simple as having those supportive mentors, colleagues, sponsors around you so that you feel like you can be doing your best work and putting yourself out there and taking those chances.
Yeah, that is a really big one. What you just said here, the environment, but also people you surround yourself with. I want to share like the last few months, like I've really put myself out there to surround myself with the right people. So in August, I went to Paris for a women's mastermind and surrounded myself with like 8 other fantastic, high achieving women.
Yeah.
And I came back transformed, like on fire, ready to take on the world.
Mhm.
Because one of the core messages from that mastermind was, "You're meant for something big. You're meant for something big." And I really believe that, and I realized when I came back, no one has ever told me that before. I never really thought of that way, and I really start saying that I'm meant for something big. I'm meant to do something amazing to make a difference in this world. And so, who you surround yourself with is important, right? Like last night, I had a impromptu mastermind with other fellow career coaches. It was like 10 p.m. till like midnight here. It was impromptu. We were just sharing our goals, our dreams, what's working, what's not, best practices, cheering each other on. And we all left like very inspired, empowered. encouraging one another. We're all doing things differently, but we're sharing what works and how we can support one another there. So I love what you just shared. That environment and then who you surround with. The piece is so important, especially I feel like right now with the last few years of the pandemic, of being home and virtually not seeing a lot of people. Putting ourselves out there, getting back out there to connect with people, that human connection, I think is so important there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see what the chat here is saying. Yeah, amazing. So let's move on to our next question. It ties into this is how to recognize and own your value with confidence. So I think specifically I want to get this into from a job search standpoint, or when you're asking for like a promotion or talking to yourself, how do you really own that? And in other words, how not to downplay your
Yes.
accomplishments.
Yes, and this is a core skill to be able to overcome imposter syndrome, is to be able to internalize your accomplishments so that your self-perception more so matches the reality. So this is a big part of the work. One of my favorite exercises or tools to give clients is to create and keep a brag file. People have different names for it, brag file, smile file, whatever, what have you. But essentially, this is a place where you are documenting your wins, your achievements, situations where you may have showcased or exercised a skill. And it has a few purposes. The first is that it helps to rewire that negativity bias that comes with the imposter syndrome, where I I don't know if anybody else has had this, but you get to the end of the day and you say, "Wow, I did nothing today. I did nothing of value. What a waste I was. Therefore, I am unworthy." So your brag file helps you see, actually, no, I did make a difference today. I did contribute to this strategic project. I did move this forward. So it's good on a day to day basis to be incrementally boosting your confidence. But it also comes in extremely handy when it comes time to sit down and update your resume, update your LinkedIn. It also gives you content regularly to be sharing on LinkedIn. Hey, I had this great win. Here were difficulties I faced actually on the way there. And here's what I learned from it. So it's useful in so many respects. So before I go on, Diana, I want to
Yeah.
pause. I know you may
I,
have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I love this one. I'm really big with the brag file, or I call it the win your wins. I think it's huge, especially the work I do in interview coaching or helping people put together a resume on LinkedIn. A lot of times, and what I've seen is that we've been conditioned to list out more of our responsibilities of what we've done, but not what we've done differently. And so when we
Mm,
really think about what we've done differently, is that's when we really are identifying our own value, our own uniqueness, how we've really contributed. And this is why we probably hear like really articulating your own accomplishments and results, because it's more specific. When you can really identify those specific accomplishments and results with even like tangible numbers, it sounds more impressive, but you also see that's a fact. It's the truth. It's not something that you've made up. It's the reality there. And so that will help essentially shift someone becoming more confident, right? One of the things I always hear from clients when we're starting out, it's like, oh, that's just part of my job. That was just part of my responsibility, right? So they don't really necessarily think of it as important work or significant work, or the work that they do matters. But when you start shifting and writing down, like one of the questions I recently learned from my fellow career coach, Tiffany Uman, she's like, to help you identify your own value, like, what would not have happened if you were not there? What
mm,
would not have happened if you were not there? And that's like a reverse psychology questions to think about, essentially all the things that happen because that you were there. And essentially that's really listing out your uniqueness, your contribution, and your value there. And it's a game changer. One of the things that I've been teaching a lot with clients is the difference when we think of selling yourself, instead of thinking that you need to sell yourself, think of how you are serving others, or think of how you're serving the employer. And that will change the way you look at your own skills, your own knowledge, your experiences, how you are being of a service.
I love it. So I love that question. What would have happened if you, or what wouldn't have happened if you were not
You weren't
there?
there. Yeah.
Brilliant question.
Yeah.
That connects to another exercise I often give clients, especially ahead of workshops or speaking engagements. I'll often have people reach out to several people in their network, 5 to 10 people at most, and ask them, What do you think, or what do you feel my top 3 strengths are? And how have I served you, or what have you enjoyed the most about working with me? And
Mm,
this isn't about seeking external validation for somebody else to give you a pat on the back and say, good, good girl, good job. It's really about seeing your value through other people's eyes. Because when we have imposter syndrome, we downplay that. The things that come easy to us are often our greatest strengths. Yet we don't value them because it's easy. We didn't work hard for them many
yes.
times. And so it can be really helpful to have that articulated to you, to have the language other people use to be able to articulate that for yourself.
Yeah, I'm big fan of knowing your strengths. I too get my clients to put together a perception survey to find out their value, and it's always an eye-opening exercise. People really love it, and this is actually to me, it's also part of personal branding. Like when you really are aware of your strengths and your unique value, you know how to really position yourself more effectively and how to speak more powerfully as well. It really has that ripple effect by just having that self-awareness of what you bring to the table. And
Yeah.
my belief is that by doing this kind of exercise, it will help you also at the end of the day when it comes to a job interview to close a deal, to also negotiate a better offer there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me see a comment here from Steven. At work, I naturally take notes on Microsoft OneNote. So while I'm at it, I jot down wins along my task. Amazing. And OneNote saves them automatically. So they're always there when I need access to them. Writing them down helps you process. Amazing.
Love.
Yes. You know, one thing from that Paris mastermind, like we have like this group chat, ladies group chat. What I love of our friend Indra who started is every Friday they'll ask us like, what are your highlights from the
Yes.
week? What are
Mhm.
your wins? What are you celebrating? How are you honoring yourself? And I love that because we're all supporting one another. We are celebrating one another. And that's a great way to surround yourself with people to cheer you on of these wins there.
Yes. And to also redefine what success means. Yes, success may mean you get a promotion, you get assigned to a big project, you get the next interview. But we need to redefine that. it that can become a slippery slope when success equals perfection. But if we redefine success as things like, I pushed through a fear or resistance I had, I spoke up about an important issue, I uh, had a good interview, even though I made a couple mistakes in sharing my stories, it was still a great interview. I hit a small milestone. So
Yeah.
celebrating those little successes is, it may seem frivolous, but it's really a skill set to start helping you internalize your skills, your competencies much more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially in a job search.
Yes.
Don't wait to celebrate until you get the job. Celebrate all the little things you're doing to get yourself ready so that you know you are progressing forward. And that's what's going to give you confidence, like taking that action, little steps along the way. So, we still have a great audience here. We have a couple more questions. If you have any questions for us, feel free to type in the chat room. So, the next question here is how to go after opportunities, even if you're not fully qualified. We've probably heard some stats here. Oftentimes, especially for women, they have to wait till they have 100% qualification. They feel like they have 100% qualification before they
Mhm.
apply for a job out there.
Yes. And so my criteria is, if you fit 70% of the criteria or more, apply. What is the worst that can happen? And I think that's a good tool there. Actually take yourself out to the worst case scenario. What happens? They don't respond, you get an interview and it doesn't work out. Even if that does happen, you still have practice, right? You've still gone through the process of refining your resume for that role, which may help you for another role. So actually take yourself out to the worst case scenario, to the extreme. You can also look at, what's the best that could happen, right? We often get so attached to thinking about the worst case scenario that we never consider the upside of, what could actually happen if I put my name in the ring for this, or I send my application out. And so looking at those two extremes can often help you land somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I love what you said here is really having that possibilities mindset.
Yes.
What's possible if I go after this, right? Having that possibility of what could happen. So a question from the audience here is, Laura, what are appropriate ways to stop worrying? Which I think ties into stop overthinking.
Yes. Yeah. So I would definitely check out my course, Overcome Overthinking, if you feel worry is something you struggle with. That idea of looking at the worst case scenario and the best case scenario is a great tool for dealing with worry. As is something I call the 10 10 10 test. So 10 10 10. Will this situation still matter, or will I be upset about it, or will it be impacting me 10 weeks, 10 months, or 10 years from now? And usually the answer is no. That most situations in that time frame, we'll forget about it. And so much of overcoming worry is perspective taking,
Yeah.
right? And that can be a very helpful perspective taking tool to just really unhook yourself from all of that rumination and fears.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good one, perspective thinking. We
Yeah.
also have another question here from Sharon. What is the best way to be heard when you do speak up?
Yes.
Mm,
Yeah. So I know we had a question about this
yes.
on our
Oh,
agenda for
yes.
today. So yeah, I'll go
How
to
to
that.
speak up,
So
even if you're
yeah,
new to the job.
especially
Yeah.
yeah, especially if you're newer on the job. This tends to come up when people are newer on the job because they think, "Who am I? I haven't been on the team very long." But you have to realize, number 1, you were hired for a reason. They want you there because they want your expertise. And also, you may offer an advantage because you haven't been engrossed in the project yet. You're not biased, or your thinking isn't colored by certain situations that have already happened. So that's the first, is sort of a mindset shift around that, to realize that by speaking up, yes, even if you're not 100% an expert, can actually be the breakthrough the team needs.
Yeah.
I think also for sensitive people, it's very important to feel comfortable with the people who are in the room. So, especially if you're new to a job, this could be like doing a listening tour. So, spending your first couple of weeks or even your first month having one on one conversations with people to understand, what are your priorities? What are the pain points you're trying to solve right now? How can I be helping and serve you, so that you feel more informed and you feel like you have the context in order to be able to speak up effectively.
Yeah.
The third thing I'll say is making a commitment to yourself to speak up early, to raise your hand early on and speak up early. This is important because people who tend to speak earlier in meetings, there's a perception bias that those people tend to be seen as more confident and more competent. But it also means that you'll have the chance to speak and offer ideas before, I'm sure we have all been in this situation where you're thinking something and you don't say it, you're overthinking it, and then someone else says the same thing and you're like, darn. So it prevents that. Just get your thoughts out on the table. And it means that your fear doesn't build, right? You sort of get your voice out there so you feel more comfortable for the rest of the time.
Yeah.
And I think, Diana, you can probably speak more to this, is to reduce the pressure on yourself. Where again, imposter syndrome can make you fall into comparison, perfectionism, that I have to say the perfect thing, it has to be groundbreaking, and that can cause us to choke and not say anything. So reduce the pressure. Can you ask a question? Can you piggyback off of what someone else has said, or plus one, and add a bit more context to what someone else has already shared? Take that pressure off that it has to be this groundbreaking, fully original thought.
Absolutely. If you can relate to this, type in a +1. If you agree with this, type in a +1 here. Participating. I love this, right? Don't delay it. Just participate, speak up, because that helps essentially increase that visibility and credibility as well. I have to share with you, when I was in university and business school, I had the softest voice in class. And oftentimes I was told I was not participating enough. And participation mark was 50%. So if you don't participate, you fail.
Wow.
And so I had to, like in my second year, like start, because I had this, I guess I was telling my story that because English is not my first language, so therefore it's hard for me to speak up right away. And so what I did was I start writing my thoughts down on a Post-it note. And so I would raise my hand once I have that until I get picked on, so I know exactly what I'm going to say. But the point here is you don't have to be perfect. It's to really share a point of view. Obviously, you don't want to just say something for the sake of it. You want to say something that is related to the topic, or at least acknowledge and make a point there.
Yes.
So yes, I love that. This is like fantastic advice. Yes, so many people can relate, agree to this. Yes, participation. Don't wait to delay here. Okay, so my final question here, I'm sure there's some more from the audience, a few more we'll take, is how do we gain confidence from criticism? Particularly the scenario, because I do hear this a lot. I feel like with the pandemic, I can see a lot of clients where they feel they're just not good enough because they get a lot of negative criticism from either their boss or colleagues. And that's just greatly, they feel frozen of actually moving on or doing something.
Yeah, this criticism can really be a blow to your confidence. So I like to tell my clients that it's important for you to listen to the criticism you receive, but you don't have to internalize it or necessarily act on it. So, what I mean by that is, let's say your boss, for your example, Diana, says, "We need you to speak up more in meetings, you're too quiet." That's one person's opinion. And yes, your boss is an important opinion, so that does carry weight, but can you triangulate that? Are there other sources you can go to where you can say, hey, I received some of this feedback? You don't have to share who, but you can say, what's your perception of how I interact in meetings? What would you like to see more of or less of? But don't automatically take one person's opinion as fact and feel like, I think with imposter syndrome, because we're so focused on our weaknesses, we feel like we have to jump on top of fixing every single piece of feedback or criticism that we get. We feel like, oh, I need to correct that and I need to correct this. And that can leave you feeling horrible and very overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So that's first, is to try to get someone else's perspective and to remember that one person's opinion may be reflective of their biases or where they are at that moment. So if your boss has a bad day, the feedback they give you that may be harsh or more critical may just be a reflection of their own emotional state, or in many times that person's inability to give constructive feedback. So keep that in mind as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing, a very practical exercise that you can do, is get a sheet of paper and split it into 4 different columns. In the first column, you want to write down exactly what was said, exactly what the person shared with you, not your interpretation of it. So, what someone said to you could have been, "We needed the slides to um, we need the slides to be less verbose. You know, we needed less text on the slides." Your interpretation could be, "I'm a horrible presenter."
Mm.
But you want to take exactly what was said in the first column. The second column is everything that's wrong with that feedback, the misconceptions that person had, everything you don't agree with. That is your place to rant and get out your emotions. Then in the third column, you start to shift your perspective to look at what might be right or instructive or useful. Is there a helpful tidbit or takeaway for you to improve your workflow or what have you? And you may find out actually there is nothing helpful about that, and that's important to know too. And then the last column is, what are your next steps? What are you going to do? Is there an actual concrete action you need to take? Apologizing, updating the way you do something, or is there something you need to do for yourself? Disconnect from the situation, go take a walk, sleep on it. But that's a very, it can be very helpful, especially if you're someone who struggles with ruminating, to just take a more objective, methodical view and process for processing that feedback.
Yeah, that is so good. I love that you provide very specific tools and step-by-step exercise for the audience here. I really want to encourage for those who are here listening to this, like watch the replay again, because Melody shared a lot of fantastic tools, like step-by-step that you can follow, and please share this with others that you know who can really benefit from this. So I want to ask the audience, what is your biggest takeaway from today's show here? Like, share with us some of your top nuggets, golden nuggets that you learned from Melody here. This was such a fantastic show. Like, I loved that we're able to cover all the questions. There was one question from an audience here. Let me see. How do you shift from micro to macro due to always overcompensating to either imposter syndrome or being in a toxic environment where you've always had to prove yourself? Or being in a toxic environment, you had to always prove yourself. So this, from micro to macro, I'm not sure if I understand that. Compensate. Is this good overthinking, or?
I'm going to take this in the direction of boundaries.
Boundaries? Okay.
Because to me, that can be a difference between operating in the micro, where you're just reacting to every situation and request that is coming your way, versus being more macro, being able to pull back and think and act strategically. And so, for example, that might be, I've worked with many clients who are in roles where they have a lot of requests and people asking for their time. Can you find ways to streamline those asks? So I once had a client who he was in a very, very cross-functional role, and his entire day was responding to Slack messages, or can you get on a call to talk about this quick? And he had no time to think macro. And he was actually starting to get negative feedback about that he wasn't being strategic and he wasn't being promoted as a result. So what we did was something very tactical, and we created a system for him where people actually had to fill out a form if they wanted a feature request or they wanted a change that his team needed to push through. And that form was sort of a gating feature that required people to say, why do you need this? What do you want done? What is the level of urgency? And so it was a very helpful filter to make other people more specific about what they needed from him. And it actually served to eliminate a lot of those requests because there was friction. He wasn't just always available to people. There was a barrier, or basically a hoop people had to jump through to get his time.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. So let's see what clients, what people are commenting here. Tiana shared a key learning that sensitivity is a strength. Someone else shared, it's a believe in yourself. Don't sweat the little stuff unless it's important. That's great. Stuart shared as well. Call on your inner coach. Why are you doing this? How would my personal hero respond to this situation? Go back to your values. How can I grow from this? When I have to handle this situation, like when have I handled this situation before? What thoughts gets me closer to my goals? Oh, these are great notes. They've taken great notes here, right, Melody?
Love it. Amazing.
Amazing. So many people have been asking, is the recording available? Absolutely. You can check out the recording from the link that you're seeing now, or come on over to my YouTube channel at Diana YK Chan. We'll be adding timestamps later on as well, so that you can go back to these specific questions easily. We'll be adding that. This was fantastic, Melody. Thank you so much.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much, Diana, for having me, and everyone for taking time out of your busy days to spend time with us.
Yeah. I want to end with like words of encouragement, right? Because I know a lot of times my audience here is like in job search or career change. Well, I'm really big on affirmations. One of my affirmations is called I am MVP. I am markable. I am valuable. I am proud. So if you can type in the chat here that I am MVP. I am markable. I am valuable. I am proud. So really believing that you are enough, that you matter, and that you have something great to offer to this world. Type in the chat, I am MVP here. Yes. Ending on a high note here. Yeah, so we got a lot of positive feedback. Lily said this was amazing. One of the best talks. Yay, that's amazing. Lily is one of my former clients who brought me to speak at the UN 5 times. So she's an amazing client. Thank you for being here again. Awesome. Yes. Embrace your gifts and conquer the beliefs that you have, and don't give up on yourself. Amazing. Amazing. Oh yeah, so many thank yous. I hope you're seeing this too, Melody, as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
amazing
you, everyone.
event. Thank you so much for being here today. It was such a great show. Yeah, definitely. This was a really great talk. You gave some really practical steps and tips and tools to follow through there. Yeah. Oh, I got to share this. Stephen wrote, Melody, I listened to your interview on Jessica Chan's podcast earlier this month. Between then and now, I love your energy and how actionable your tips are. My biggest takeaway, lean into your uniqueness and thoughts that can bring you.
Love it.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I see so many I am MVPs. Thank you, Melody, as well. I will see you soon. We'll have some shows coming up in November there. So until next time, take care. Bye, everyone.